All right, hello again, and welcome back to Growing Up Alien, or as I like to now call it, the Jesse Hour, or Welcome to My Nightmare. So, as the thumbnail illustrated today, um, we're gonna talk with Jesse is gonna come today, and but yeah, I'm gonna have Eka do some debunking for some of the I call it dangerous. So it isn't like, opinions or whatever. My problem with a lot of these individuals is that, they're really putting people in not only debilitating type situation, but self-hatred, sense of there's something lacking in you, patronizing, neotenizing narrative. Um, And sure, I think they're doing it because it's great for business. So if you can get people to believe that they have a problem, then you can sell the solution. And I think that's a lot of what you're saying with some of these individuals. So it's like I said, I'm gonna disappear in a little bit because Ego will be talking. So I also want to schedule a live where maybe folks can ask him a question. Let you know at a later date is soon if you'd like. He's pretty much available. He does work now with Will here and there, but not too much. Um, on the base while we wait for I don't know, something to shift anyway. But and I just want to preface because he's always demanding. Oh, a couple of things I should mention. So, because of the craft that fly over my house every night, it's just we're always joking. I think people take us way too seriously. We're really a bunch of asinine fools. And largely the conversations that I have with Ika are just stupid. So this is we bought this using my money, of course. He's laughing. I only got the clothes I'm wearing. I know. So using my this is a ring. It's a jade. I said so we decided what we would want. He wants me to wear a ring to show all of the other Nordics that, I am not for sale. I'm purchased. And this is so I bought so it's jade. And I can't wear rings on my finger. I can, but I don't like wearing rings, so I figure, well, this would be great. So because he wants me to wear it all the time. No, that's all the time. So I just do that. Yeah, I don't like stuff on my hand. I can't wear stuff on my head. I can't wear earrings. I can't like a lot of stuff like that. And it's likely often I don't know where else it would come from, and obviously it must be the MyLabs. And of course, Jesse is just so angry about all that. And all those people. Yeah. So and Ika always wants to, he always prefaces these things with saying that, he's just a guy. There's nothing, um, different about him, or, it's like he just wasn't born on this planet. That doesn't make him any different, from anybody else. So he always wants to say, I mean, he's just going to bring in a perspective that's outside the psyop. I think that's really, I don't know if I say think, I know that's what he's trying. That's what he wants to sort of bring to the table, let's just say. He brings it to the table for um, discussion and for folks to have a different perspective. And of course, you can do the same thing with your contacts and pull the information that you get from your experiences when you go up, and talk to different people upstairs when you're doing work upstairs. So, yeah, I guess we're gonna just run right into it because I don't want to blah blah blah. Right? I hate that. Fast forward that. So I found this picture and I'm gonna pull this up. When I disappear. So I found this first picture. Let me do that now, actually, while I'm blah blah here. So let's see. Here we go. Okay. I was watching a really neat video. Um, it was on a contactee in Spain, and there's lots of contact experiences, mass contact experiences coming from Spain. One of the, I guess, the most famous ones in the ufology, exopolitics community is the UMO, who were in the 1950s writing letters to Spanish speaking areas. And they were trying to make contact that way. So, but anyway, this is was one of the videos, and this fellow was in the Spanish military, and he had a contact that he worked. He wrote a book too, actually, about his contact with this fellow who was an extraterrestrial. Anyway, this picture is one from the book, and I was like, "Holy crap! This is really close to what Eeka looks like." And I'm like, I couldn't believe it when I saw it. I'm like, pretty close, especially like the jawline. So that goes back to, this is some of the techniques, and I don't want to create suggestion. And of course, this is a big problem that we have to consider. We always have to take an analytical look. We don't have to, you can do whatever you want. But I mean, I for one, take a very analytical approach to this. And one of the dangers that can occur, which is why I don't watch a lot of other channels and I don't follow other people, is because that creates or could create suggestion, which would then interfere or muddy the waters of the information I'm getting. And so yeah, I mean that's something that each one of us has to kind of swim through personally. Not only dissecting what kind of experiences we're having and making sure we throw in concepts like suggestion. Is this you or is this somebody else that may have, is a thought that you're getting because somebody else had it, rather than saying, okay, I know deeply I've had this experience, and okay, this person has a similar one. So that vindicates me. There's a difference, right? And of course, that is only evidence for you. That does not mean it's real. And I always say this, um, just because somebody writes a book, that's not evidence. That's sci-fi. They wrote a great piece of sci-fi. Now, I'm not saying it's fake, but there's absolutely zero evidence that just because somebody writes a book or does a podcast, that it's actual evidence. So evidence is physical evidence, right? So until you can bring forth physical evidence, then, it's just an additional piece of information out there, whether or not, I mean, you have some very, very well crafted fictional things, and you don't know you really don't. So that's why the best thing to do is to focus on yourself and to create, a construct and a story that makes sense in your own experiences, right? And that doesn't mean like, and then basically you're doing a self debunk. That's what's important, right? So anyway, going back to the story, so this picture, like I said, this is really, his nose is more aquiline, less, there's no dimple, but he's got really, really large eyes like that, and the jawline is noticeable. So when we were first, I call it the Reconquista, when he when we were first reconnecting on a deeper level than we ever did before. I mean, it's very different when you're interacting with ETs as a child and then when you're interacting with them as an adult. So I know, and I've had very, very vivid telepathed images of his face. So I'm like, oh wow, and we were talking, and he was actually talking. I could hear his voice, and I saw him. This is when he was actually showing me he was in the military, and I saw his face, and it was masculine. I mean, it's a guy, right? So I'm not saying this. If you're a man and you look masculine, well, that derp, right? Exactly. So, but like just in my mind, we were telepathing, and I don't know, how thoughts just come out because you're not used to telepathing to a lot of different people, right? So I had mentioned the fact that he had a masculine face, and it was like, and he says, and I remember that I could hear his voice completely, and it isn't something I would have thought of. And he said, "Are you disappointed?" And I'm like, "Oh shit!" He heard me think, right? And obviously, right? We're telepathing, so I'm like, "No, no, no, no." Anyway, so he continues to bring this up. No matter how many times I say he's perfect, blah blah blah, I love you, yada yada yada, he still brings anyway. So he just does it to tease me at this point. And so anyway, what's interesting, and I'm trying to describe like what our race looks like. We're not the only race on Erra, um, but the hell, let's see. This one popped up. And it's like that looks exactly like my. I mean that's almost photographic of my brother. I mean that is really close to what he looks like. Kyle. Anyway, the the eye size. This one really came out. I'm gonna say pretty rock actually, except for a little bit of the facial hair under the nose. He doesn't have that. Maybe he'd like that, but he doesn't have that. The indigenous Native American is really structurally close to what we look like. And all you have to do is take what, like a generic, right? Anyway, and the maybe like the Navajo or whatever, any really a Native American and kind of just change their skin color, make it white, make it Nordic, Scandinavian, right? And give them light hair. Now we don't all have light hair. We have some people have red hair, all kinds of different, dirty blonde, blah blah, whatever. But that's pretty damn close actually if you do that. So yeah, it's a very the men can be quite, they do have masculine, God forbid, right? It's masculine features, but yeah, the women are, I think the women are less noticeable that way. Some more than others. The women look largely British or Scandinavian, I guess, and also like Polish or that area of Europe. They look like that too. And there's a whole mix of what we look. We look like people. We look like all different kinds of people. I mean, there isn't, these are AI, so I mean, it is what it is. So, all right, I'm gonna ask him. I'm gonna try to get out of this section and just begin to ask him now. All right, some of these questions. So, pulling him forward. All right, and I'm not, for those folks who have conniptions about channeling, this is thought transfer. This is how we communicate. This is how animals communicate. It is simply a scientific thing. And this is what I just want to stress. You're really looking at science here and technology. And you can use your brain, that's what it's built for, to transmit using a type of scalar wave. And it will happen as quantum entanglement, which you can research all you want about what quantum entanglement is. What Einstein called spooky action at a distance. Anyway, they have since proven quantum entanglement. They haven't proven, right? Well, they don't. I mean, there's going to be gatekeepers. They don't want to prove telepathy. That's the bad guys, the dark ops did. But I mean, as far as like legit science is concerned, they tend to frown on that because they don't want anyone to know what you can do. Obviously, that defeats the purpose of the enemy isn't going to give you any secrets. So, so quantum entanglement is what telepathy is. It's not magic. So I'm going to ask him some questions here. And what we're going to do is try to debunk. Like he says, it's just his opinion. Not would say opinion, I mean, it's his view, right? He's not making stuff up. He's just like trying to share understanding. So here we go. So, first question. Beings with advanced technology are by default highly spiritual. He says, well, I think you can very easily discredit that concept because you would then be contradicting yourself. Those people who may be presenting this concept, and he says, he wants to be clear that he's not charging anybody with anything nefarious. He's just saying, I'm going to bring this concept forward. If you are, he's saying, those people, if you are following the narrative and you understand some of the circumstances to what is happening, not only off planet here, referring to Earth, but also on Earth itself. Bridging a concept or trying to create a link between what is termed on Earth spiritual advancement or a deep understanding and projection of a benevolent so-called spiritual way of living or state of being would have nothing to do with the technology or the technological aspect of a race or a species. He says, let me bring forward something for you to consider. If you look at many of your still current indigenous people living on this planet without much technology, would they be, therefore, somehow spiritually deficient? I think we can assume there that that would be, as a hypothesis, largely incorrect because we do understand that many of these, as you call them, indigenous races, are quite spiritually advanced. Using technology as an indicator or as a validation to understand the advancement, the spiritual advancement of any race is incorrect. In fact, it is quite illogical. You already understand that the wars in space are fought between many different races and beings. The technology being deployed in these pursuits oftentimes are equal, but oftentimes those beings who desire to colonize and who desire to engage in activities that you might call not spiritually advanced, have technology and have a longevity of not only technology, but as a cohesive species, civilization. These races and beings have highly advanced technology. Ultimately, I want to share with you the concept that finding any kind of correlation between technology and technological advancements and the quest for technological advancement has nothing to do with the benevolence and spiritual advancement of any race or being. You will find not only on Earth, but on other planets as well, extremely advanced as far as benevolence is concerned, spiritual advancement. Please be advised that the concept of spiritual advancement is a term only used on Earth. We do not use that term. So if anyone is speaking to one of us that was not born on Earth, it is unlikely that you would see reference or hear reference to anything referring to spiritual advancement, other than the way I'm using it here to explain it in the context of this question. Oh, he's bringing me up here. He's like, so I'm just going to say, all right. So he's saying about like the way I often will say that, animals, right? So we all know how wonderful it is to be with an animal. And he's saying, with your animals, they're highly spiritually advanced according to, human valuation. He says, animals have no technology. You don't need technology to be spiritually advanced. And he says what I'm saying was correct. It's kind of often not correct, but like whatever in our opinions, right? That to express love, right? To express unconditional love requires no technology. So that's something to consider. Anyway, I think we've taken care of question one, right? Let's move on. All right. So, um, question two. Are Earthlings, can't read my own writing. Are Earthlings a neotenized race that are learning to develop spiritually? All right, here he is. Let's see. Oh, he's kind of angry. Okay. He's kind of like, I can feel some like, okay. Okay, says you need to stop beating yourselves up. That's cute. This is one of the darkest or darker psyops that is being fed. He's showing me, okay, he's going, this goes way back. He wants folks to understand that you have to ask yourself, okay, you have to ask yourself, what is the agenda or intent of anyone or any group that openly asserts that you, as a collective and as an individual, are somehow dysfunctional, are somehow lacking in a combination, he says, of like spirituality or he says words like, frequency. We do not see you as children, and we do not treat you as children. So he says, anyone that would somehow also mention that you're like a developing person, that your race has some kind of collective deficiency. He says that is a psyop, and it's a very dark psyop. I mean, he says it's one that's been not only physically cultivated here for millennia, but also intellectually through a mass dystopian agenda. He said, okay, you see when you are using my word brainwash to propagate a sense of lack in the self, of self-hatred, of a perpetuated concept that you can't reach some kind of bar. He's showing me like, yeah, it's like he says they continue to raise a caliber that you must, like he says, the glass ceiling concept. So there's this caliber that you have to reach, and one that they will continue to raise. It is a caliber you'll never be able to reach. So he wants people to understand that anyone who tells you that you're somehow broken and in need of, he says, a perpetual quest to attain or reach some kind of artificial summit. He says that in and of itself should awaken within you a sense of deep questioning. He says, whoever would give this to you, whoever would make you try to reach these unattainable summits, what is their goal? What is disparaging you meant for? Why would anyone who self-professes that they are unconditional love or that they are doing something in your best interest then immediately gaslight and insult you and make you jump through hoops? Please be aware. Please think about what agenda someone like this would have for you. I said, what about this idea that they're developing spirituality? So he doesn't really, he's trying to like, he says, I don't understand that. Okay, he's gonna frame it a little differently. He says, all right, he says, let me this is the hell. I'm just gonna say before he says he agrees. I'm just gonna give you this is the hell perspective. All right. This is not a correct perspective. It is just a perspective. You can take it or leave it as I say. All right. But what he wants to explain is that oftentimes this belief system, okay, that he's gonna bring forward now is the same belief system that these operators um, who are trying to deceive you will use. Okay. All we call or consciousness is all soul, right? Animals, humans, plants. These are naturally in a state of perfection, just like an element is in a state of perfection. If you were to hold pure gold, he's saying something. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So he wants to use that as an analogy. Gold. Let's just take gold. You're holding some pure gold. He's what does this gold need to do in order to become better at being gold? So this gold existed, materialized, right? Here it is, right? In a state of goldness. He said, this is the same that applies to all other beings, those who have soul and consciousness. He says, they are instant, they are by default. They are what they are. There is nothing to fix, there is nothing to perfect. There is no hurdle to jump. There is no pinnacle to climb to. To assume or assert that gold needs to somehow do something or be manipulated into something that creates more goldness than pure gold already is. He says that is what these people are basically doing. It is rhetorically as well as literally an irrelevant concept. Gold cannot be more gold than it already is. Yeah, okay, I think we pretty much, there we go. We pretty much debunked number two. All right. Now, let's see. Is Earth a school for souls to learn karmic lessons on? He's laughing. He's smart. All right, let's see. Okay, so he says, who singled out Earth for this purpose? Who told you that this is the purpose of incarnating on Earth? From his, because this is from his perspective, we see Earth as another planet, no different than other planets. He's like Erra or like Venus. He says the only difference is that the citizens of this planet, basically have been duped. Okay, so he's showing me like, okay, he says this has to do with okay, he says so this question has to do with the manipulation of the population here. It's part of the control mechanism. He says one of the things that was done to the population here using different techniques, cultural progression, cultural manipulation. The goal, he says, was to instill in the population here a deep belief system that Earth was segregated from, excised, basically, from it's almost its place in space. He says, once you segregate a group, a race of beings or people in this case, he says it's then very easy to feed them whatever you want. And they would have nothing to pull from in order to debunk, or as he says we're doing now is debunk or argue against. In fact, he says, those that would try to were punished. Um, he said he has never been on any other planet, and certainly Erra, right, is one of them. Where again, he says, well, you got to go back to this concept we talked about with the gold. He says pure gold has attained pure goldness. It is in the state of being pure gold. Souls and consciousnesses, beings, are already in a state of pure gold. So the idea that they would go to a planet specifically designed to attain the state that they are already in is not, what are you trying, I can't hear you. Wait a minute. I guess he says, just say rational. Okay, just say rational. Yeah. He's saying he says you have to root the understanding in that all beings are already in their state of perfection. So I just asked him a question. I said, well, what about like personality and you're not learning lessons, but I mean, you know what I mean? He's like, he says, you need humans on this planet, he says, need to stop looking at personality and authenticity and the expression of emotion, the expression of self as a thing which is by its nature faulty, and that there is a perfection or a canon of the being that you should be. He says, there is no canon. The only thing you should be, and he's going back to what I always say, is look at the animals. You are what you are meant to be, and you are what you are meant to do. And when you express emotion, that is the purpose of physicality. So there are no bad emotions. There are no bad expressions. Those are all concepts. You can create concepts, and that is not a thing to also worry about. So I'm asking him, I'm throwing a question at him. I said, well, what about people who make bad choices and like they hurt others? He says that's not, he says there are degrees to that. And only societies can decide what degree of toleration they will have for those beings who are expressing those kinds of intent. So he wants to also to say that what you're seeing on Earth is artificial. He says when you place beings in artificial circumstances, and he's saying in this case here, survival, you cannot condemn or judge actions that are rooted in, so he's showing me physical disease, he says. So he's showing physical disease. So what he was trying to talk about, somebody who acts in a psychopathic manner, he says that is a physical disease. So you cannot judge somebody acting with this physical disease. We have to be careful because it's YouTube, so he understands that. So I can't explain a lot of what he's going to say here because it's YouTube. So, but I think you get it, right? Okay. So what he's saying is, and I'm showing, and we're telepathing together quickly. I'm just showing him, well, what about somebody who kills and murders and blah blah blah? And he says, if it is, well, there's a couple of reasons. I have no idea, right? Mind control. All right. So you have to look at things in a different way. Okay. Now I lost my, where was I going with what we were talking about? He's like, where were we going? He said all societies are somehow artificial, and that societies will create codes of conduct, he says, that are based on judgment, that are based on observation, that are based on what that society would want to have to be sustainable, or in some cases, not sustainable. So these codes of behavior are variable, and they are not built, they are not rooted in any kind of karma. He wants to be clear, and he doesn't want to insult anybody, but he has never heard of karma until he learned it about here on Earth. There is no concept of karma on any with any species or races that he has ever met. So he's not making it. He just wants to be clear that he's never heard of it. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and that Earth people are wrong for talking about karma. He's just saying he has never heard of it. Okay, so he can't answer a question concerning that. He's only answering this question in a way that he understands. So I want to just be clear there. Yeah. So he says, yeah, he says how races or species behave or act, or what is sort of considered good behavior or bad behavior, he says is all relative to the species and race. Okay, so next question. All right. Has Earth experienced negative alien influence? Because you have experienced, so of course, I'm just going to say first that we don't have a concept for the term alien. Everybody is, and we don't use the term alien because it makes no sense. That if that makes sense. I'll just give an example for, people ask me, I'm alien. Am I an alien? It's like, well, you are too. We all are. Everyone. So that's why it doesn't make any sense because everyone is an alien. And I'm going to tell you that no one, everyone here on Earth who thinks they're Earthlings and that they're not an alien, you're an alien. All life on Earth is alien species. So there you go. All right. So going back to, he's asking me. We're just talking together here. I'm just no. Let's just talk about current events. Okay. He wants to say, it was sort of like being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He says that's what happened to the race here on this planet, the race of humanoid on Earth. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the resources on this planet were desired. And the planet itself, he says, the real estate was desired. And because the planet had no, and he wants to say, it's not, the same thing happened to the Ahel, okay? Uh, when races or species do not have a defense system, and this happened to many, right? And he's going to say, yeah, this is fairly common. When they don't have a defense system, then other races or species that are seeking, will have easy access to the planet that race is on. He says it's just cause and effect. When there is something seeking something and you have what they're seeking, and that other race or species needs to fulfill its desires, the things that it needs to survive. Everything wants to survive. So when that race or species has a societal civilization based on survival and accessing and acquiring the needs for its survival, based on a philosophy, he says, this is what you call service to self, he says. Based on a philosophy of service to self, they will do whatever it takes to gain the things that they have within their civilization deemed acceptable. He says, this is so he's okay. There is a philosophy or programming, right? I'm going to call it program, and yeah, he's whatever you want to call it. He's a program. He says there's a philosophy on Earth that things are good or bad, and he says that is just an illusion. Well, that is just a belief system. Then that things are good and things are bad. He says we don't have a concept like that. Really, what you want to look at, he says, is a scale of toleration. What are you interested in tolerating? How much will you tolerate, and how much can you actually create or have the ability to create boundaries in laying out a protocol, or he says, or a line to cross, he says, that you say this is acceptable and this is not acceptable. He says that's actually what you're looking at. He says this idea of eradicating what is not even in existence, a concept like evil. He says that is a phantom. He says there is no such concept of good and no such concept of evil. He says what races and beings do is self dictate an agenda for their civilization that says, I will tolerate so much. Here is my line. So, in a negotiation, he says, with another race, or in this case here on Earth, not only another ET race, he says, but also your own race. So we're going to use, I'm just going to say, we're going to use the word ET here just for ease of conversation. Okay. So between, he says, between an ET race and your own race. Because the civilization here acquiesced to, and he says they acquiesced, he says, he's clear about this, because they did not have a defense mechanism. The same thing that happened to the hell, right? When you don't have a defense mechanism and you are meeting up with another race or being that has designs on pushing into your boundary, but you have no way of actually holding that boundary. So when another race presses into that boundary, you cannot launch a resistance. He says the same way you can press your hand into water, but you can't press your hand through a tabletop. He says that is what you're looking at when we look about things about what you want and what you don't want, or what a civilization wants or what a civilization doesn't want. Is your civilization water, or is your civilization a tabletop? How far can another civilization press into your civilization? He says this is the boundary limit, okay? He says because the race on Earth was water, just like the Hell were at one point, other groups were able to press through. No boundary was set. He says this is not a frequency. This is not an ascension problem. This is not a level of advancement. He says it has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with whether or not you are able, or how far you are able to defend your boundaries. So what happened? He says what you see here on Earth is a civilization that is water, that allowed other groups internally and externally to enter into their realm, enter into beneath the water, and manipulate. He says that is what you are witnessing. And he wants to really stress the fact that it has nothing to do with the density you're in. It has nothing to do with your frequency. It has nothing to do with you being broken or bad or what have you. This is exactly what happened to the hell. But we weren't fed a bunch of, he's got baloney, he's a baloney. We weren't fed a bunch of baloney by our own race and by other races or beings that we were deficient, that we were broken, that we had to fix ourselves. What we did, and he's saying, and I remember this after extreme violence, we were almost eradicated. Right? What we did was realize, and he says he realizes this is going to be very unpopular. But what he's only going to tell you what we did historically. So what the hell did was raise defense. Instead of being water, they became a tabletop. So they raised a military. They raised a defense system. They weaponized their technology. They weaponized their technology to become a tabletop, not to become an aggressor. And that's a choice. He says, see, that's a choice. That is what a civilization chooses. He says there is absolutely no way And in fact, you should never do this. You could never. In fact, you would be imposing. You would be just what they are if you were to impose on any civilization some kind of universal law or some kind of canon of behavior that you think is the correct one. You see, that is exactly what they do. Those groups you consider violent colonizers, they are imposing their reality on you using violence. Now, if a benevolent race, what we call a benevolent race, were to do the same thing, they would be the same thing. That would be colonizing. You've already had this happen on your planet, where these self-proclaimed benevolent organizations usurped will, usurped the minds of others. And you see that beneath what they wanted you to, okay, he's showing me the mask that these organizations have, the mask of benevolence. They were not benevolent. They never were. He says, you can't have water. He says, in the state of liquid, that's not wet. So no group that is benevolent will ever enforce will over you or demand you act a certain way or insult you or say you're imperfect. They are not benevolent. What you do is, and this is, he says, this is what he means, this is what he thinks that humans on this planet mean by universal law. He says that is universal law. It's about allowing. It is about lack of control. He says, when you have a human that tells you that universal law is a thing that is enforced, walk away. Nothing is enforced. What universal law means is that each civilization, and in fact, each life form, is allowed to be what it is. It is not judged. It is allowed to be what it is, and it is allowed to progress and exist as it wants to. What you were witnessing in these space wars, what you were witnessing here on Earth, is the creation of a boundary. So essentially, all races, all civilizations are allowed, and he says allowed is the wrong word, but he's going to use it, are allowed to be. There is no superimposition of any view or way of living or way of being upon the other. That is what you call the negative side does. He said, I just want to be clear that no positive side will do the same thing the negative side does. He says, what you are talking about with universal law is the creation and the maintenance of boundaries. And those boundaries change, and they are only relevant respective of each civilization and what that civilization, and even he says that each being decides is correct for them. I think we answered. All right, let's move on. Let's move on. All right. Da-da-da. Okay. What is your take on ascension and our Earth people learning to ascend? He said, well, I think we've already, really covered a lot of that question. He says, I have no idea what ascension means. He said, that's just me. He said, again, he said, that's what we have on. I've never heard that on my, no, he said, personally, I've never heard that growing up on Erra, and neither has he. He's never heard that used. He's not even sure what that means. Because he says you're going back to gold. He says you're going back to gold, right? Gold in its pure state as an element is gold. What is it going to ascend to? There is no other state of goldness other than that of being gold. And this is his answer for that question. He says, he just wants to show something. He's like, you have to understand this concept of ascension, he says, comes from a sense of you seeing yourself or being told by someone that the current state of goldness that you are in is somehow a faulty or tarnished state of goldness. So he wants you to understand that like that doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense. You can't have pure element and then say it's tarnished. It isn't. It's a pure element. He's saying, so anyone that sees you as you are now, and you, as you are now is a pure element. You cannot be a pure element and tarnished at the same time. There is no place to ascend to. He wants you to understand that. So I'm yeah, we were just I said we were talking earlier because when I made these questions we were already talking. He says yeah, he says I had mentioned earlier like it's sort of like he says a gecko wanting to become a giraffe. And that's his question. He wants to ask people that what do you want to become? What do you want to become? He wants you to see like he sees you as perfect. And he doesn't mean, I think you're saying not perfect in the sense of like there is like everything is perfect. Everything is as it is supposed to be. So he says this idea of trying to attain something other than what you are is like the gecko wanting to be a giraffe. And he says, of course, a gecko would never want to be a giraffe. Otherwise, he would be a giraffe now, right? Does that make sense? And I'm talking, I'm telling, yeah. He says, yeah. I said, I tell him, I said, yes, I think a lot of people have been brainwashed with this idea that somehow like extraterrestrials, which don't exist anyway, right? So that there are extraterrestrials that are like demanding that people here somehow attain some kind of like place that they're not in right now. And he says that he says you would have to, he says, if you are talking, okay, I'm saying, for shits and giggles. All right. He says, if you are talking to, all right, an extraterrestrial that tells you this, you have to question the motive of that person or being and why they're judging you like that. And if they're telling you that they are themselves an ascended race, he says, I'm going to tell you now, there are no ascended races. There are races, period, and species all coexisting. Sometimes he says, let me go back to, I'm not going to go back to the boundaries things because he's talking about that. It is about races and beings coexisting with boundaries. And your boundary, as he says, can be water or can be the table. Any race that approaches you or any species that approaches you and works with you and contacts you from a place of superiority and they gaslight you and they try to make you look at yourself as something other than what you are. You are dealing with a race that is pushing through your boundaries. You can be a table or you can be water at this point. But I'm going to, and he wants to too. He says, this is a warning. If you choose to be water and to interact with those beings, you're in grave danger. So I think that pretty much answers that. I think we move it on from there. All right. So next question. Okay. Oh, what is your take on manifestation? Ha! He says, we were joking around with this earlier. He says, it would be really nice to just, manifest in front of me a boat. Right? Um, manifest. Okay, he says, so if you're thinking of manifestation as a magic trick, as he just mentioned, like you could just hold your hands up and create an apple. It's like, so if you're thinking about that as a magic trick, he says, I don't understand. He's never seen that. So there are technologies that can manipulate the atomic structure, right, in the subquantum, things that are called, that you call replicators, right? That is it is not manifestation. It is actual physical creation of an object. There is no magic involved. He says, if you're thinking about the state of manifestation as one of intent, as one of creation in the way of what you would like, that's not magic. He says that is not magic. I said that would be nice. He said, yes, it would be. And then I was like, so he says he says he thinks that some people are talking about when they talk about manifestation in the term of thinking about what you want and figuring out how you can attain it is that thing that you want. He says there is no magical process there, whether you're on Erra or whether you're here on Terra. He says there's no difference. He says really it comes down to solidify a concept of will in which you have a desire and within the limitations of the space that you're in. You see, we are all limited. There are all limitations of space. But those limitations are simply reality. So he says, okay, so what he was trying to say is that reality, right, can so he's saying, yeah, so reality it can limit the process in which you manifest or act on. So you would say he would rather use the term act on rather than manifest. He says, because that really is not a great term. He says there are limitations in which you can act on what you want. He says right now, he says, right, okay. He says right now he wants to be with me. But there are limitations in where we are right now at this point in time that make that desire impossible. So he says you have to understand that. And he says you don't want to create illusions in your own mind of that which is possible and that which is possible. He says that comes from reality. He says there is a thing that is reality, right? He says, and humans use money. He says, and let's say, you have a desire to buy an expensive sports car, but the money that you currently have would prevent that manifestation of a fancy sports car. He says there's limitations in that reality, no matter where you are. And he says it's not about fighting reality. He says this is where he suspects a lot of people become unhappy because they're trying to fight reality. And he says this is the danger of a concept like manifestation. Because he says he suspects what the purpose is to create a sense of lack in a person. Because if reality, okay, he's trying to show. Okay, all right. So he says if you are trying to fight reality, he says that is a fight that you can't win. He says you have to exist within reality. And oftentimes that might mean that some of the things that you want, like he says to be with me right now, are not at that time or may never be a thing that can exist in that reality. He says, when you see yourself as experiencing a moment of life, then you no longer fixate. He says it doesn't mean it's going to be less painful. He says that's not what I'm, he says emotions are real and the pain is real, right? Because the pain that we feel right now because we're not together is real and nothing will stop that. But he says he doesn't want you to think that if you do not attain a manifest, he says that there's somehow people with a magical power, that there are certain people who have cracked a code of manifestation, let's say, um, and that they are somehow better than you. And he says that is a lie. He says that is an act of manipulation. He says in order to make you feel bad about yourself. He says that's the problem. He says because then you'll see because what they are trying to profess or show you is that if you just do certain things or sing certain songs or act certain ways, if you somehow fix yourself, again, he says we're all going back to this concept of fixing yourself, that then you could attain this status that they have. He says all that is an illusion. And what they are actually telling you is that because you cannot manifest a thing which cannot be in your reality at this moment, that somehow you are less than. And that is not true. We all have to work within the reality in which we are at the moment. This is having, however, he says, I don't ever want to say that existence in physicality must be one of having desires always met. He says that's, you understand that's not reality. And that feeling certain things is wrong. All of your emotions are valid. And all of that. He says that is the purpose of physicality, really. He says you have to. Oh, he's gonna make. He says, make the best of the situation that you're in at the current moment. He says he wishes. We all do, right? He says he wishes there was some magical way in which we, can create things for ourselves, but there isn't. But there is the will. He says there is desire. He says there is understanding yourself and what you're capable of and not letting outside influences try to undermine that. And I said Jesse just crowed on that one. So I think we'll let's move forward. Like my legs are I'm getting tired sitting here. Let me move my. All right. Are the ETs? Are the ETs helping humans fix themselves? He's laughing. He's saying, the humans have to understand that there is nothing to fix. Exactly. I think we said it a million times. All right. Do humans need to create or be in a high frequency or space, do some kind of magic trick in a space or whatever, in order to interact with extraterrestrials? He says, no. Because again, he says, we're always going back to the gold concept. You're not broken. You don't need to be fixed. He says, there's just common sense in some of these situations. He says, we would not put ourselves in danger and we would not put you in danger in some of these interactions. He says that has nothing to do with frequency or spirituality or doing any kind of fixing of a space. He says that's just common sense. We wouldn't put ourselves in danger and we wouldn't put you in danger on purpose for any of these circumstances to occur. Okay, so do extraterrestrials appear to people who are chosen or are special? He's like, he's absolutely not. Everything is done for a purpose. Everything is part of the mission here. No one is special. People are just people, whether they are on planet or beings, whether they're on planet or off planet, are all enacting their particular piece of a puzzle. No one is special. Everyone has a piece of the puzzle, and you can't have a whole puzzle with all the pieces put into places. So he says, anyone, in fact, who begins to act, he says, anyone who begins to act in this mission, who has previously been contacted as a part of the mission that they were in, who are now compromising the safety and integrity of that mission because they believe they are somehow special. That is very dangerous. He says, do you understand? He says, that is someone who is now acting out of a very unsafe place. Those people who now see themselves on or off planet as somehow chosen or special would be considered immediate liabilities and cut from the mission. Oh, that makes sense. All right. Okay. There we go. Next question. Do humans have to raise their frequency? He says, once again, refer to what I talked about, pure gold or any pure element. There is nowhere to go. Okay. I asked, well, what if they mean about like a physical frequency of the atomic structure? You cannot change the physical frequency of your atomic structure without a device. I'm showing them things like, so we're having a little conversation here. I'm like, it's not possible for any physical. So we're only going to talk about, I'm not talking about non-physical plasma beings. Right. That's derp. I mean, right. He says, yeah. Like if you are physical in a physical structure, like he is in a physical, and I know, I'm just going to bring this up because I know a lot of people have a problem with the fact of Eeka. Like he is a physical man. He has a physical body. What does physical mean? There is no such atomic vibration, right? That has nothing to do with any kind of religion. That has to do with how your atoms vibrate. Think of water, right? Water can be a liquid, can be a solid, it can be a gas. That has all to do with the vibration of the atomic structure of that water. It has nothing to do with magic tricks, okay? So there was a man and a woman on Erra, your parents, right? He's his parents. I said they got drunk. He laughs. No. So they made a baby, all right? 7 months in his mom, right? The baby is born, right? A consciousness is brought into that baby. The baby was born. That was him, right? He got on a spaceship and flew to many different, we'll jump forward. Anyway, he got on a spaceship and landed here on Earth, and he's been here for quite some time. He is in a humanoid physical body just like you are. He cannot change the atomic structure of his physical body, which is a human physical body. Just wasn't born on Earth. It was born on Erra without a device. So when you look at things like teleportation, whatever, those are devices that allow the physical body to change the atomic structure for a particular purpose. You cannot alter the physical atomic structure of your body. There you go. Anyway, that debunks, he wants to debunk this idea of frequency. Okay. Can anyone fix or alter a person's DNA? He says it is, he's trying to make sure that, what is crime and what is galactic crime. He says there are laws, like physical laws. He says, I don't mean any kind of spiritual. There are laws. If anyone were to alter, so he says you would have to gain access, right, to a person's genetic templates to alter their DNA. He says this is a crime. Does it, I said, because does this happen? He says, of course it happens, right? As we all know, crimes happen, right? I said, what if somebody asked for that to happen? He says, you cannot alter someone's DNA. let's just what let me just from your perspective as like I said, is he's here. I'm not going to say he always says he's not right or wrong. He's just giving you his perspective, what he knows. He says DNA, what humans call DNA. He says DNA. He says the best way to understand DNA is as musical notes. And the template of DNA, he says, is like a sheet of music. So each being has its own song, its own sheet of music. He says in DNA, because it is like a musical note, he's just going to use that as an analogy. You can change musical notes. He says, so if you are humming a tune, you can change that tune. You can change the meter of that tune. You can change the timbre of the tune. He can say you can change the duration of the tune. He says you can change which notes you choose to sing or which notes you choose not to sing at this point. He says, so DNA, the template of DNA, is a plastic thing. It is the signature, the song, he says, of each being. And just as you could hum a song differently, you can, okay, choose which notes of your DNA to play. He says, and I'm asking, so we're having a conversation, I said, he says, yes. He says, DNA is an echo. It holds echo. It's a recording device. He says it also acts as a recording device. So I'm going back to ultimately to the question, right? Can anyone outside you alter your DNA? He says they can. He says that is illegal. He said that is a crime. And he said, I said, what if people want somebody outside? He says, if you want somebody outside yourself to change your DNA, that is up to you to do that. He says it is highly unlikely that without technology, I'm saying, what about going to? He says, no. He says, there is no way he, as in the hell, or any Earth Terran could ever, without technology, alter anyone's DNA. I said, what if they have some kind of ability to use frequency to do this? He says, that's not possible. So, all right. That's his answer. Like he says, he's not judging anyone. He's just saying that's what he knows. So anyway, moving on. Last question. um, what do you think of the current external savior concept or story that there's no external saviors coming to save Earth people? He understands. He understands this story. He says he says just a story. He says I don't know where it came from. That there's some external like it's. He says he first understand like he doesn't understand the idea that it's wrong to ask for help. Like he doesn't understand that. Why is it wrong to ask for help? He says why is it wrong that there would be some kind of external savior? He doesn't understand that. He says if you were in need, if you were in danger, he says if your house was on fire, he says wouldn't you seek assistance from an external savior? So he says that in his mind, the concept of the that there is something wrong with an external savior, of somebody coming. He says if it's a God thing, he says I don't, he doesn't really know what to do with that. That's a belief system. He says I can't work with that. He says, but he says I mean, I'm saying yes. No, I said let's talk about this in the literal sense, okay? That there are extraterrestrials, right, who are not coming as external saviors. He says, well, firstly, we're not saviors. He says, but we don't see anything wrong with helping someone in need. He says you have to understand that there are a lot of complex political, military, and philosophical systems that operate on your planet, on other planets, and again, off planet with different groups pertaining to the situation on Earth at this particular, time. He says they're dealing with other situations as well. All of these things play in each situation. He says they do not, so we do not, is when we are working, and he says he's not one of the members that makes these decisions. So he's just giving you an overview of what he knows goes on in these, think tanks. Let's just call them think tanks. How about that? Let's call them, let's describe. Okay, yeah. He said, so in these think tanks, he says there's representatives, and they're representatives of different planets, different species, different races that all choose to be part of a think tank that maintains certain operations in galactic realms and in universes. He says there's many of them, and it's just we're just going to talk about the one here. I mean, obviously, it doesn't make sense to talk about his many. There's many of them, many, many, many. So he says, all right, so for this current think tank, he says they do not see themselves as external helpers or things. He says they are just doing what they do. And he says they're not yeah, excuse me. That's me, not him. Singling out Earth. And I'm not channeling, I'm telepathic. So they're not singling out Earth as anything other than another problem, let's say, to be dealt with. So he says, so any idea that they are against helping this planet is never been has never existed. He's like, he says, so this, he says, you have to understand this idea of an external savior or that it's wrong to be helped does not exist. It is an act of fiction. It is words of fiction. He says when a planet, when individuals, he says, ask for help, that help is given. It may not be in ways in which we agree or like. He says he's not at the table. He says, yeah, it's a hegemony. He's like, he's not at the table. He says, you have to understand, I'm talking to him now too. So he said, yeah, he says, you have to understand that there is a big, he says, you are getting help. He said, there is large numbers of individuals, again, like himself, like me, like you guys, right? He says, yeah, he says, you're part of your own help. He says, right? He's like, just the same way. He says, if your house was on fire, you would make a call to the fire to people. He says, see, you're helping yourself. He says, you wouldn't just sit there and watch the fire and wait for help. He says, no. He says, you stand up, you make a phone call, and you say, hey, my house is on fire, and then you leave your house. He says, right? He says, so you are enacting your own help. And those that are capable of helping arrive. He says, this is what we're doing. So never be afraid. In fact, he says, you must ask for help. That's not a sign of weakness. He says, that's a sign of strength. That's a sign of sanity. That's a sign of sanity. If you just sat in a burning house and never asked for help, that would be, he says, you would die. He says, you have to ask yourself in that case then, what is the agenda of anyone who says you must not ask for help? Well, I'll answer that question. To me, that's the enemy. He nods. So just sum that last question up, right? If you're being told not to ask for help on Earth and on off Earth, if you are currently not a part of this, if you are currently just sitting there and not asking for help, okay, you're working for the enemy. Who would not want you to ask for help in a war situation like we're in right now? Who would want you to not ask for help? The enemy. And I think ultimately what Eeka's trying to say here, what I've been trying, we're both kind of, he says, you got to think through all this stuff. What? There's so many, see, all of these false narratives that we're being fed. The person feeding you the false narrative or the group feeding you the false narrative contradicts themselves. You cannot be in unconditional love while judging someone else. So anyone who tells you that you have to fix yourself in order to earn unconditional love, that's contradiction. And like I said, Eeka and I are not picking out people. We're not saying they're bad people. We're not picking any group out. We're not judging any of these groups. We're just trying to get you to think. And that's the choice. You don't have to think. But if it doesn't make sense, if the person is contradicting themselves constantly, you need to, make sense of that, right? And I think Eeka brought up a really great point with the gold, right? He says, we're all gold, all of us. That doesn't mean we're like, he says, we're always say we're expressions. He says, we're not like gold. It's like, gold is conscious. He says, but gold does not have a soul. Gold is not it is not a dog. It is not a tree. It is not a humanoid. It is not a reptiloid. It is not you're right, a benevolent, a conscious gray. It is not any of those things. It is not gold does not have a soul. He says, and because of that, you are a magnificent, emotional creature that lives on many dimensions. That is the thing gold is not and can never be. He just says, I use it as an analogy that you are like gold, that you are like a pure element. So, like a pure element, by default, a pure element is not tarnished. And you are as a pure element. You are not tarnished. I think we'll just end it. That's it. That's it. Okay. Here he is, Mr. Brownhouse. He's laughing. Mr. Brownhouse. He wants to say that he loves everybody, and he's always like he says keep on keeping on. All right. Yeah. He says don't stop the fight. He says don't end the war before it ends. And it's like exactly. Yeah. Right. Cross the finish line. Right. All right. Well, as always, we'll see you upstairs.